Dominic Castelli never expected his Tuesday to end with his own life hanging by a thread. He walked into that freezing butcher shop to break a soft, overweight woman who dared defy his crew. Instead, he found himself entirely paralyzed, a 6-inch boning knife pressed lovingly against his jugular. Rain hammered against the cracked neon sign of Hayes Prime Cuts, casting long, bloody red reflections across the wet pavement of South Boston. Inside, Riley Hayes was working the night shift. Riley was a big woman. She was unapologetically fat, carrying her weight, not with the timid slouch of someone trying to hide, but with the solid, immovable gravity of a boulder. Her forearms were thick from years of hauling sides of beef, her apron tied tightly around a wide waist, and her grip on the heavy steel cleaver was absolute. She wasn't supposed to be an obstacle. To the Castelli crime family, small-time business owners were just entries on a ledger, sheep meant to be sheared. Dominic Castelli, the newly minted head of the family after his uncle's sudden incarceration, was meticulously cleaning up the neighborhood. His underboss, Tony Valenti, had spent the last 3 weeks visiting local shops, raising the protection fees by 40%. Everyone paid. The baker, the mechanic, the dry cleaner, everyone except Riley. When Tony had swaggered into the butcher shop 2 days prior, blowing cigarette smoke over her fresh cuts of veal and calling her a fat cow who needed to learn her place, Riley hadn't argued. She had simply picked up a meat tenderizer and shattered Tony's left kneecap with a single practiced swing. Tony had crawled out into the gutter, leaving a trail of blood and shattered ego. Word spread fast on the streets. You don't humiliate a maid, man, and live to open your shop the next day. Dominic couldn't let it slide. A boss relies on fear, and fear dissolves the moment people realize the monster bleeds. He decided to handle the butcher himself. He wanted to look this woman in the eye and watch the defiance drain out of her before he ordered his men to burn the shop to the ground. The bell above the shop door chimed, slicing through the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of Riley's cleaver. She didn't look up immediately. She was busy breaking down a heavy pork shoulder, expertly separating bone from muscle. Dominic stepped inside, accompanied by 2 of his heavy hitters, Paulie and Vincent. The men locked the deadbolt behind them and flipped the open sign to closed. Dominic wore a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Riley's annual rent. He was sharp, angular, and possessed a quiet, venomous energy. He stepped over the sawdust on the floor, his expensive Italian leather shoes stopping just short of the display glass. "You're a hard woman to reason with, Miss Hayes." Dominic began, his voice a low, gravelly hum that usually made civilians visibly tremble. Riley wiped a streak of blood off her cheek with the back of her wrist, leaving a faint crimson smear on her pale skin. She finally looked up, her dark eyes locking onto his. She didn't shrink. She didn't gasp. "Shop's closed," she said, her voice completely flat. "Come back tomorrow at 8, though I don't think you're here for the brisket." Dominic offered a cold, predatory smile. "I'm here about Tony. He's currently in surgery. The doctors say he'll walk with a cane for the rest of his life. Because of you." "He shouldn't have put his hands on my scale," Riley replied, returning her attention to the pork shoulder. She picked up a smaller, razor-sharp boning knife and began slicing with terrifying precision. "It disrespects the meat, and it disrespects me." Paulie, a hulking man with a broken nose, took a step forward, his hand slipping into his coat. "Watch your mouth, pig. You're talking to Mr. Castelli." Dominic raised a hand, stopping his enforcer. He was fascinated, though mostly offended by her lack of terror. He analyzed her. To Dominic, fat meant soft. It meant lazy. It meant a lack of discipline. He assumed her size made her vulnerable, a target that couldn't run, and couldn't fight back for more than a few seconds before losing her breath. He thrived on breaking people's psychological defenses, and he assumed hers were built entirely on false bravado. "I don't think you understand the gravity of your situation, Riley," Dominic said, stepping around the counter, invading the sacred space of her prep area. "You think because you've got some padding, because you swing a hammer at a man who wasn't looking, that you're tough. You're a lonely, overweight butcher in a dying neighborhood. I own the police. I own the landlords. By tomorrow morning, I can make sure you don't even have a name." Riley stopped cutting. She set the knife down on the stainless steel table. The ambient hum of the commercial refrigerators seemed deafening in the sudden silence. She turned to face him fully. She was taller than he expected, and up close he realized the sheer breadth of her shoulders. "You talk a lot for a guy who just walked into a room full of sharp objects," Riley noted softly. Dominic chuckled a dry, humorless sound. He closed the distance between them, stepping deep into her personal space. He intended to grab her by the jaw, to force her to look up at him, to establish the absolute physical dominance that had defined his entire criminal career. "Look at you," Dominic sneered, raising his hand. "You're shaking. You're just meat, sweetheart. And in my city, I'm the grinder." He reached out. That was his first and nearly his last fatal miscalculation. Dominic's hand never made it to her face. Before his fingers could even brush her jaw, Riley moved with a sudden, explosive velocity that completely shattered his prejudiced expectations. She didn't block his hand. She intercepted his wrist, her thick fingers locking around his bones like an industrial vice. Dominic gasped, shocked by the sheer unyielding density of her grip. He tried to yank his arm back, but Riley used his own pulling momentum against him. She pivoted her heavy frame, dropping her center of gravity. Using her substantial weight and lower body strength, she twisted his arm downward and stepped into his guard. Crash! She slammed Dominic face first into the freezing stainless steel prep table. The impact knocked the wind out of his lungs in a violent hiss. Before Paulie or Vincent could even process that their boss was airborne, Riley had her left forearm pressed brutally against the back of Dominic's neck, pinning him to the metal. With her right hand, she snatched the 6-inch boning knife off the table. "Hey!" Paulie roared, yanking a heavy semi-automatic pistol from his jacket. Vincent did the same, both men aiming directly at Riley's broad back. "Take another step, and your boss gets a second smile cut right below his jaw." Riley barked, her voice echoing off the tiled walls. She wasn't bluffing. She pressed the razor-sharp tip of the knife directly into the soft flesh of Dominic's carotid artery. A tiny bead of dark red blood welled up around the steel. Dominic froze. The cold metal of the table bit into his cheek, but all he could feel was the searing, terrifying heat of the blade kissing his pulse. He couldn't swallow. If he swallowed, the blade would pierce the vein. His heart hammered, wildly trapped in the humiliating reality that he was completely, utterly at the mercy of a woman he had dismissed 30 seconds ago. "Put the guns down, boys." Dominic choked out his voice, a strained whisper. "Do it, now!" Paulie and Vincent hesitated, exchanging panicked glances before slowly lowering their weapons to the sawdust-covered floor. "Kick them away," Riley ordered. They complied, the heavy guns sliding across the floor and under the meat display cases. Riley leaned in close. Dominic could smell the metallic tang of raw meat and the faint scent of vanilla on her skin. Her heavy, rhythmic breathing was calm. Far too calm for a civilian holding a Mafia boss hostage. "You made a few bad assumptions today, Mr. Castelli." Riley whispered, her lips right by his ear. Her voice was devoid of panic, replaced by an icy, calculated edge. "You looked at me and saw a fat girl you could bully. You saw soft, You didn't realize that weight is leverage. You didn't realize that breaking down 200-pound hogs every day gives a person a very deep understanding of anatomy. She applied a fraction of a millimeter more pressure to the knife. Dominic squeezed his eyes shut, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. But your biggest mistake, Riley continued, the twist of her words sinking in, was not doing your homework on who owned this shop before me. My father was Arthur Hayes. Dominic's eyes snapped open. The name hit him like a physical blow. Arthur Hayes. I see you know the name, Riley noted, feeling his muscles tense beneath her forearm. Everyone in the New England underworld over the age of 30 knew Arthur Hayes. He wasn't just a butcher. During the brutal gang wars of the 90s, Arthur had been the premier cleaner for the O'Bannon Irish Syndicate. When the Irish needed a body to completely vanish, without a trace it was brought to the back room of Hayes Prime Cuts. Arthur knew how to dismantle a human being and, under an hour, feed the flesh to the stray dogs and dissolve the bones in industrial lye. He died 5 years ago. Dominic stammered against the steel table. He did, Riley agreed. A heart attack. But not before he taught his only daughter the family trade. How to hold a knife, how to process meat, how to make sure a mess is cleaned up so thoroughly that even the FBI can't find DNA. She leaned her considerable weight a little heavier onto his neck, restricting his airflow just enough to induce panic. You walked into my shop threatening to make me disappear. She growled, the raw power in her voice vibrating through the table. Do you have any idea how easy it would be for me to drag you into the walk-in freezo? Right now, your boys out there, I've got enough lye in the basement to turn all 3 of you into a bad memory by sunrise. You think you're the monster in this city, Dominic? You just stepped into the monster's kitchen. Dominic was experiencing a bizarre cocktail of primal terror and shocking, undeniable intrigue. He had spent his entire adult life surrounded by manufactured toughness men who talked loud and puffed out their chests. But this woman, she was entirely authentic. She possessed a terrifying raw competency. The way she handled his weight, the absolute steadiness of the blade at his throat. She was a predator, cloaked in an unassuming disguise. What do you want? Dominic whispered. The arrogance completely bled out of him. I want you to listen to me very carefully, Riley said, easing the blade back just a fraction of an inch, allowing him to take a shallow, shaky breath. Your boys are going to walk out of that door, and you are going to sit in that chair in the corner. We are going to renegotiate the terms of my existence in this neighborhood. And if you ever insult my weight or my business again, they won't even find your teeth. Nod, if you understand me. Dominic gave a slow, microscopic nod. Riley smoothly stepped back, releasing him in a single fluid motion. She kept the knife in her hand, relaxed but ready. Dominic pushed himself up off the table, gasping quietly as he rubbed the back of his neck. He looked at the tiny smear of his own blood on his fingertips, then looked at Riley. She stood there, massive, unbothered, wiping the blade on a towel. Poorly. Vincent, Dominic rasped, straightening his ruined suit jacket. Wait for me in the car. Boss, are you crazy? We ain't leaving you. Paulie started. Get out. Dominic snapped his authority, returning though his eyes never left Riley. The 2 enforcers glared at the butcher, but eventually turned, unlocked the door, and stepped out into the heavy rain. The door clicked shut behind them. Dominic stood alone in the shop with the woman who had just brought him to his knees. He expected to feel rage. He expected his wounded pride to demand immediate, violent retribution. But as he looked at Riley Hayes, wiping down her butcher block, as if she hadn't just held the boss of the Castelli family at knife point, A dangerous, twisted smile crept onto his face. He didn't want to kill her anymore. He wanted to know her. Rain continued to batter the reinforced glass of the storefront, mirroring the violent storm of thoughts swirling inside Dominic Castelli's mind. He slowly walked over to the corner of the shop, his expensive Italian leather shoes crunching softly against the sawdust. He pulled up a heavy wooden chair and sat down, his posture rigid but lacking the arrogant swagger he had brought into the room just 10 minutes earlier. He watched Riley. He watched her move. She did not rush. She did not tremble. Riley walked over to the massive industrial-grade Hobart meat grinder sitting on the steel counter. She began feeding chunks of beef into the top, the machine roaring to life with a deafening mechanical hum that vibrated through the floorboards. She was a woman of substantial size, her thick hips and broad back, speaking to a lifetime of heavy, unforgiving labor. Dominic had spent his entire life surrounded by women who starved themselves to fit into designer dresses, women who moved like fragile birds. Riley moved like a freight train, deliberate, unstoppable, and entirely comfortable taking up space. "You have my attention." "Miss Hayes," Dominic finally said, raising his voice to be heard over the grinding machinery. "You said we are going to renegotiate the terms of your existence. Let's hear the terms." Riley flipped the switch on the Hobart grinder, plunging the room back into the quiet, rhythmic tapping of the rain. She picked up a pristine white towel, methodically wiping down her massive Wüsthof butcher knife. "My terms are simple and they are non-negotiable," Riley stated, her dark eyes locking onto his. She stepped around the counter, pulling up a sturdy metal stool opposite him. When she sat, she leaned forward, resting her thick, powerful forearms on her knees. Total exemption. First Hayes Prime Cuts is permanently off your collection ledger. No protection fees, no envelopes on the first of the month. I protect myself. The block's immunity. Second, the bakery next door, the mechanic shop across the alley, and the florist on the corner. They are under my umbrella now. You leave them alone. You don't raise their rates, you don't threaten them, and your boys don't even look at them funny. Respect third, you make sure Tony Valenti knows exactly why he is walking with a cane, and you ensure that neither he nor any of your other trigger-happy foot soldiers ever step foot in my shop trying to prove a point. Dominic let out a low, raspy laugh, leaning back in his wooden chair. He crossed his legs, brushing a speck of sawdust from his ruined charcoal trousers. "You are asking for a lot of real estate, Riley. You are asking me to look weak in front of my own crew. In my world, if a boss lets a civilian dictate the terms of a neighborhood, he doesn't stay a boss for very long. Sharks smell blood." "Then you better learn how to swim faster," Riley replied coldly, "because if you refuse, I will personally guarantee that the police receive a very detailed anonymous ledger of your uncle's offshore accounts. My father didn't just clean up bodies, he cleaned up paper trails. I still have his safety deposit boxes." Dominic's breath hitched. She held all the cards and she knew exactly how to play them. But beneath the frustration of being cornered, a deep, undeniable fascination was taking root in his chest. Her absolute fearlessness was intoxicating. Her thick, sturdy frame wasn't a sign of weakness. It was an armor forged from a brutal, uncompromising reality. "I can agree to your terms," Dominic said slowly, his voice dropping an octave, becoming intimately quiet. "But if I am going to grant you the power of a protected capo in my territory, you are going to do something for me in return." Riley narrowed her eyes, her grip tightening slightly on the towel in her hands. "I am not a hitman, Castelli. I process beef and pork. I don't kill people for your family." "I don't need a killer," Dominic corrected, leaning forward, matching her posture. "I need a ghost. I need your father's network. The Irish syndicate, the O'Bannons, they are making moves in South Boston again. Their new boss, Declan Fitzpatrick, has been intercepting my shipments coming through the docks. He knows my routes. He knows my schedules. Someone inside my own family is feeding him information. Riley remained silent, processing the weight of his words. Your father knew the O'Bannon family better than anyone. Dominic continued his eyes, tracing the strong, determined line of her jaw. He knew their safe houses, their lieutenants, their communication methods. I need you to tap into those old connections. I need you to find out who the mole in my family is. You find the rat and you get your block forever. You have my word as a Castelli. Riley stood up, her heavy boots thudding solidly against the floor. She walked toward the heavy insulated metal door of the walk-in freezer. She paused, looking over her broad shoulder at the Mafia boss sitting in her shop. I'll ask around, Riley said, her voice gruff. But if I catch you or your men snooping around my property, while I do this, all deals are off. Understood, Dominic whispered, standing up. He felt a strange reluctance to leave. He had come here to destroy her, and instead he was leaving with a partner and a burning, undeniable attraction to a woman who could snap his neck if she chose to. 3 nights later, the neon sign of Hayes Prime Cuts was switched off, but the interior was bathed in the harsh, sterile glow of the fluorescent overhead lights. Riley was in the back room, her thick, muscular arms hauling a 100-pound side of beef onto the steel hooks. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her breathing heavy and rhythmic. She enjoyed the physical strain. It silenced the anxiety creeping into her mind. She had made calls. She had spoken to old weathered men who remembered her father with a mixture of reverence and terror. And she had found the answer Dominic Castelli was looking for. The heavy front door of the shop rattled violently. Someone was trying to force the lock. Riley wiped her hands on her stained apron, her instincts flaring. She quietly unhooked a heavy forged steel meat cleaver from the magnetic strip on the wall. She killed the overhead lights, plunging the shop into shadows, illuminated only by the streetlights filtering through the front windows. The lock shattered with a loud crack. The door kicked open, and 2 figures spilled into the shop. I'm telling you, she's in here. I saw the lights, a voice hissed. Riley recognized the voice instantly. It was Paulie, the hulking enforcer with the broken nose who had accompanied Dominic days earlier. But Paulie wasn't here with Dominic. He was here with a tall, wiry man clutching a silenced submachine gun. Just burn the place down, Paulie, the wiry man growled with a thick Irish accent. Declan wants the butcher gone. She's been asking too many questions about our operations. We can't let her report back to Castelli. Riley's blood ran cold. The mole wasn't some distant cousin or low-level soldier. It was Paulie. Dominic's own bodyguard was working directly for Declan Fitzpatrick and the Irish syndicate. I want to put a bullet in this fat cow myself, Paulie sneered, pulling his heavy pistol and clicking off the safety. She humiliated me in front of the boss. They advanced into the shop, their boots stepping onto the sawdust. Riley didn't hide. Hiding was for prey. She used her deep knowledge of the shop's layout, moving silently through the pitch-black prep area. She positioned herself behind the massive display counter. Her breathing completely controlled her massive frame, perfectly still. As Paulie stepped past the display case, passing within inches of her hiding spot, Riley exploded from the shadows. She didn't use the cleaver. She used her environment and her sheer, overwhelming physical mass. Riley lunged forward, throwing her entire 260-pound frame directly into Paulie's side. The impact was like a car crash. Paulie let out a wet, breathless gasp as Riley's heavy shoulder drove into his ribs, shattering bone. The force of her tackle sent them both crashing backward, obliterating a wooden display rack and sending jars of marinades and spices shattering across the floor. "What the hell?" the Irish gunman yelled, swinging his weapon toward the noise. Before he could pull the trigger, the front door of the shop burst open again. Dominic Castelli stepped into the fray, a suppressed pistol in his hand. He had been tailing Paulie for 2 days, growing suspicious of his erratic behavior. Seeing Paulie break into Riley's shop had confirmed his worst fears. Dominic fired twice. Puffed. Puffed. The Irish gunman dropped to the floor, grasping his ruined chest, his submachine gun clattering uselessly across the tiles. But Paulie was not out of the fight. Fueled by adrenaline and raw panic, the large enforcer violently shoved Riley off him. He scrambled to his knees, raising his pistol wildly in the dark, aiming directly at Dominic's silhouette in the doorway. "Dominic down!" Riley roared. Without hesitating, Riley grabbed a heavy cast-iron meat tenderizer from the floor, one that had fallen during their struggle. With a guttural shout relying on the immense power of her thick shoulders and heavy arms, she hurled the iron tool across the room. It struck Paulie squarely in the side of his skull with a sickening crunch. Paulie's eyes rolled back in his head, his gun firing a single stray bullet into the ceiling, before his massive body collapsed onto the sawdust, completely lifeless. Silence descended on the butcher shop, broken only by the sound of shattered glass settling and the heavy, ragged breathing of the 2 survivors. Dominic cautiously lowered his weapon, his eyes frantically searching the shadows until they locked onto Riley. She was slowly pushing herself up from the floor, her apron torn a thin line of blood dripping from a cut on her forehead, where she had grazed the broken shelving. He rushed over to her, his polished shoes crunching over broken glass and spilled blood. He didn't care about his expensive suit. He didn't care about the dead men on the floor. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands urgently gripping her thick, strong arms, checking her for bullet wounds. "Are you hit?" Dominic demanded, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just panic. It was absolute, terrifying vulnerability. "Riley, look at me. Are you shot?" "I'm fine," Riley gasped, waving him off, though she allowed him to help her to her feet. She leaned heavily against the stainless steel prep table, wiping the blood from her brow. She looked down at Paulie's unconscious, bleeding form. "There's your mole, Castelli." Dominic stood slowly, never breaking eye contact with her. The adrenaline of the life-or-death struggle was rapidly fading, replaced by a suffocating, magnetic tension that pulled him toward her. He looked at this woman, her messy hair, her torn, blood-stained apron, her imposing, beautiful, unapologetically heavy frame. She had just saved his life. She had thrown herself into the path of a bullet to protect him. He stepped into her space, gently lifting a hand to cup her face. His thumb brushed just below the cut on her forehead. Riley tensed her dark eyes wide, but she didn't pull away. "You threw yourself at an armed man," Dominic whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "You could have been killed." "He was in my shop," Riley replied stubbornly, though her voice betrayed a slight tremor. "I told you I protect what's mine." "And what am I?" Dominic asked, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before meeting her eyes again. The air between them felt dangerously electric. "Am I yours to protect, Riley?" Riley let out a shaky breath. She looked at the ruthless Mafia boss standing before her, a man who had walked into her life to destroy her and had somehow become inextricably tied to her survival. She reached up her thick, calloused fingers, wrapping firmly around his wrist, pulling his hand away from her face. But she didn't let go of him. "You don't own me, Dominic," Riley said fiercely, her voice echoing in the quiet, bloody shop. "You don't get to claim me just because we bled together. I am not one of your soldiers. I am not a trophy. I am the woman who holds the knife." A slow, devastating smile spread across Dominic's face. He stepped even closer until his chest brushed against her soft, heavy curves, entirely captivated by her fierce independence. "I know," Dominic murmured, leaning in until his lips were mere inches from hers, the scent of vanilla and copper wrapping around his senses. "That's exactly why I can't stay away from you. You're the only person in this city I actually fear, Riley Hayes. And God help me, it is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." He closed the distance, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that tasted of iron adrenaline and undeniable power. Riley hesitated for only a fraction of a second before her heavy arms wrapped around his neck, pulling him violently against her, returning the kiss with the same fierce, crushing intensity she applied to everything in her life. They stood there in the dark, surrounded by the wreckage and the blood of their enemies, two unstoppable forces colliding in the shadows of South Boston. The Mafia boss had finally found his equal, not in the glamorous boardrooms of the underworld, but in the heavy, capable hands of the butcher who had taught him how to bleed. If you felt the adrenaline of this gripping Mafia romance, hit that like button and share this story with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, dark romance tales and real-life drama that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Drop a comment below, telling us your favorite twist, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a single upload. Your support helps us bring more fierce, unstoppable heroines to life.